thank you. Thank you for having us. I think we all know that, the titles that we hear, the names that we see, even the photos don't necessarily represent who people are. So I'm just going to give you a quick sense of who we have here on the panel. We've got, as you heard, I'm going to start with Alice. We've got Alice. Now, she's the Global Purpose and Impact Manager at NASDAQ. But really, Alice is a purpose power broker and company therapist. Are we not often the company therapist? We've got Will. We've got Will from NASDAQ. From TikTok. He is the employee impact leader under global CSR at TikTok. But Will, he's actually a champion cheerleader. You should see that outfit. And global time zone guru. I actually could use your help with that. Yeah. Marissa, our friend Marissa over here, O'Rourke. She's the senior manager of employee volunteering at ServiceNow. But she is actually an employee engagement enthusiast and camp counselor. Again, are we not often? Stephanie, right here at Ford, social impact and smart mobility leader there. But she is the impact igniter and chaos coordinator. As we continue talking today with all of you, I would love to hear your actual thing you do. Because this is the space we're in. We're building this place. We're building the field of social impact together, and we all know that we're a little bit rogue in our entrepreneurship in this space. We're making it happen, and we do what we have to do. So let's get into this discussion. So I'd love to hear from each of you, just like what's your vibe here? What's your experience with Champion Networks? And we'll start with Alice.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Like was previously mentioned, my name's Alice Zients. I am born and bred in Baltimore, Maryland, for anybody from the East Coast. Maryland, I see you. So I have a lot of experience working with volunteer champions. I'm very fortunate to say so. I've been in the industry for 10 years, and I kind of feel like if you are, and you're not working with champions, are you in the industry? I specialize in building programs from scratch, and at NASDAQ, our purpose is advancing economic progress for all. So really, when I'm thinking about champions and how I am sourcing and seeking and hopefully learning from all of them, when we think about it at NASDAQ, it's how can we make sure that people understand how they advance economic progress for all every day, whether it's in their volunteer activities or if it's just in their day job, because they really are driving that every day. And so that's how I kind of find a champion and unlock that innate passion, if you will, because that's ground floor stuff.
Nice. Okay, awesome. And let's keep going on this one for a second. Will, do you mind talking about that? Just your experience with Champion Networks?
In terms of my experience with volunteer networks, let me take you back to, I think, 19-year-old Will. 19-year-old Will was at Sonoma State University, probably about 2 hours north of here, and my first experience with volunteer networks was I worked at the volunteer office on campus actually planning events. Working with local nonprofits, it was it actually changed my career trajectory and is why I'm on this stage. But my first experience with volunteer networks was the presidents of Greek life at our school. And if I can tell you that I think we had more no-shows for our events than actually people that showed up. That was what my first experience with volunteer networks was. So moving into my career, I worked in sports alongside Marissa at different Bay Area sports teams, and our group I worked at the Raiders. It was like a 200-person organization, so much smaller compared to a lot of the companies that we're working at. And so we had like a committee that we called the Goodness Committee, and it was just 5 people, and I would more so compare it to like the party planning committee in the office. It was not robust. We did not have a strategy. It was just passionate people wanting to get together. Moving on, obviously, I transitioned into tech, and I worked at AppDynamics, a business within Cisco, and was a big part of, shout out Cisco, I know you're here, was a big part of the incredible work that they do. And we had about 20 champions spread out globally. And then to my current role at TikTok, it's been an incredible ride in the 2 years that I've been there, and we have about 50 champions spread out globally, and we'll go into more detail with that. But yeah, that's the history, and I think it's every different iteration of that has been so different and meeting so many different types of people along the way, and it's all kind of built to where we are today.
I'm so tempted to go down the road of just what was your first experience with volunteering. That story, every time I've asked it, is fascinating. So we'll do that throughout the day. But Marissa, how about you?
All right, Marissa O'Rourke, as earlier introduced, and I'm with ServiceNow. As Will mentioned, my background prior to coming to ServiceNow was in sports. So I worked for the San Jose Earthquakes soccer team here, and I originally thought I wanted to be a sports broadcaster, and I'm really glad I didn't go that direction because I don't have a TikTok, and that is, I think, very required to be, on camera and influencer these days. But when I worked in sports for 8 years, I always naturally gravitated toward helping with the community impact side of the house and the fundraisers and the volunteering efforts. So I was very fortunate to run their foundation my last 3 years there, and then made a switch over into the tech industry. And the soccer team was even smaller than the Raiders. We had 80 in the front office. If I needed to talk to HR, I walked 10 feet to find the HR person. When I started at ServiceNow, we had 9,000 employees. We now have 27,000 employees globally. And I'll never forget the first couple weeks just hearing all the acronyms being spoken around me, and it was in an entirely different language and a huge culture shock, so much imposter syndrome. And someone would ask me, who's your HR business partner? I don't know, you tell me. So I think just naturally, we all find our champions in our own different ways. And just by a show of hands, I'm curious, how many of you here have referred to yourself as a small but mighty team? Exactly. So we are nothing without our champions. So that is why we are up here to talk about our champion networks. So.
Awesome, thank you. Steph?
Yeah, so Stephanie Smith with Ford. I live in Austin, Texas. I'm a remote employee. I'm going to start a little bit differently and talk a little bit kind of about the lens in which I'm going to be speaking today. So Ford Volunteer Corps, we have impactful grant making. Our Ford Community Centers are employee volunteerism. Oh, that changed quite a bit. So Ford Philanthropy really drives positive change in its communities worldwide. We have Ford Volunteer Corps. We offer 16 hours of volunteer time off to our employees to a nonprofit of their choice. We also just instituted an expanded volunteer time off policy where we're able to offer an additional 40 hours of volunteerism to our employees for specific nonprofits such as Team Rubicon. So that's kind of the lens in which I'll speak today. My role, I lead one part of the many hats in which I operate is that I lead the implementation, conceptualization, rollout of our Volunteer Champion Network, which will encompass about 31,000 U.S. salaried employees in the U.S. at Ford. And in my past life, I also led Volunteer Champion Networks at Intel Corporation in Europe as well as the U.S.
That's experience.
There's some.
And there's some.
We won't go into the depth.
Let's do something just like a little silly and maybe annoying for a second, and I want to ask everyone in the room to maybe think of your answer to this question too. Just super quick, right down the line, one word to describe an ideal volunteer champion. Just one.
So my one word is connected. This is like a spelling bee. C-O-N-N.
Yes. Well done.
No, I think, a deeply connected volunteer champion is what you're looking for. Really, the traits of motivation, engagement, excitement, those are really important. But when you're really looking to maximize your impact, you're looking at influence and reach, and how can connectivity provide that? So when I think of a very successful champion, I think of someone who is connected across teams, executives, business units, employee resource groups, kind of the latter, and so on. That's what I think of when I think of a successful champion.
Is it bad to say available? Because that's kind of, again, key critical, in my opinion. But I do think it's about time. It's about balancing that time too. So you're gonna have to be passionate, you're gonna have to be connected. I think those are, yes, our key requirements, but if you're not available, we can't use any of those things anyway.
Love it.
That's why we moved away from voluntelling people that they had to do it because a
They
lot
don't
of those
like
were
it.
not available. My word would be influential. I think that they need to have a sense of advocating for the work and inspiring for it, because how many times have you partnered with a team or a group to add in a volunteer opportunity to an agenda, and then you find out right before it's the first thing that was cut? So they need to be able to influence and make it a priority within the group that they represent, whether it's function, region, et cetera. So I think influential is important.
My word would be resourceful. And I think I'll take a page of what Marissa just mentioned. We're a small but mighty team. We're a team of 3 that manages a global program across 30 plus countries. And resourceful, like we don't have the time to handhold them all day long. And so We need people that are going to find ways to get the job done, that are going to use the communities that they have, that they're a part of, and the tools that we've given them. Yes, we need to educate and empower them, but we really want people to be scrappy. And you say resourceful, I think of like a scrappy event planner running around getting things done. So that's part of it, but I think the bigger part of it is using the resources at hand, whether that be the relationships they have, the knowledge of the business that they have, and kind of pulling all of that together to pull off a great event.
What your structure looks like of your champion network. I'm going to go to you first again, Alice, if that's cool.
Oh, the most unstructured of them all.
That's why.
Okay. So you've heard me say it once, you'll probably hear me say it again. At NASDAQ, our purpose is to advance economic progress for all. Sometimes people connect with that really, really deeply, and sometimes they don't. And that's okay. They still work at NASDAQ, and we still love them all the same. So when I think about our champion network, ours is really based in recognition. It's not actually that we are asking them to do things and empowering them to do things like you will hear from all of my peers. Ours is just a lot of pomp and circumstance, because sometimes recognition is exactly what someone needs to be empowered to step up after that recognition. So our purpose champions are peer nominated, they are vetted through our purpose team, and then they are hand selected by our CEO, who spends the time to read every single application from someone's peer that they wrote about them, and then goes on a global town hall, which NASDAQ hosts those every 6 weeks without fail, and she announces every single one of those people, and she talks about them, about who they are as a person, why they are a purpose champion, and what you can expect from them in the future under that reign, if you will. We also, for the first time this year, recognized a committee, because we're starting to see an emergence of purpose committees. And so recognizing teams, and everybody knows the harrowing school group project, that's not easy. And so we've started to include those teams as a part of this. And after that recognition, and again, there's like total rewards points, and you can I keep telling people, I'm gonna buy a drill with my total rewards points because I need one. But now I don't have to pay for it. We also do a contribution to a charity. Those are all great things, but sitting on a global town hall with 9,000 of your coworkers and hearing the CEO talk about you as an individual is a really, really motivating thing. And so that's how we kind of galvanize our small army of champions.
Marissa, do you want to talk about yours?
I love that you think that's unstructured to have your CEO talk about your champions at a town hall.
You should see the behind the scenes.
Well, sitting next to you here, it sounds quite structured, because I feel like mine is more unstructured. So when I started at ServiceNow 6 years ago, it was actually the start of our global impact and ESG, social impact, whatever you want to call us. So I have the unique privilege of having been there since the start, which means that it was very grassroots in the beginning. We had no strategy to go off of. We were still deciding what is our unique place to, what the stake in the ground, the impact that ServiceNow is positioned to make. And why I can speak to experience that voluntelling doesn't work. We used to have senior director and above people that got an email from our CEO that said, you've been selected, and nobody's gonna say no to that, but none of them were available. So those evolved to global impact councils. We now have 21 councils around the world, but those actually aren't the champions that I'm speaking about. For me, that is one type of champion. What I've learned is that I need to pull the levers. I guess I'm flipping a switch. I'm saying pulling a lever, and I have to turn on all the switches of all the different groups that I can work with, whether it's by function. I make sure that I'm partnering with the EA and the chief of staff and the biz ops and the HR business partner for each of our executives. This year, I'm really trying to partner more closely with people managers, because fortunately, when we do employee voice surveys, we hear that employees do believe that we're a purpose-led company, we have the right strategy, but they're not hearing about it from their managers. They're not feeling supported to get involved in this work. I partner with our employee belonging groups. So for me, when I speak to a champion, it's truly anyone at the company that has the influence, like I talked about earlier, to plan a volunteer event. So when I'm speaking to champions today, we truly need to make sure that all of our resources and all of the tools and all the templates that we build are for anyone, because I never know if it's going to be an individual contributor, a people manager, an EA, or anyone that's going to come to want to build an event. So that's my champion network for the context.
Steph, do you want to speak to it? And then Will, I'm going to take you to the next question unless you want to add anything, so just think about it. Structure?
Sounds good. So our volunteer champion network at Ford Philanthropy will be both volunteer-led and formally structured. Currently, today, we have about 150 informal volunteer champions, some of which are active and some of which are not active. So we really need to formalize that structure and that process, and we're really excited to kind of offer two different roles. We're going to have a volunteer ambassador role and a volunteer chair role. Volunteer ambassadors will sort of organize the volunteer events in their region. The volunteer chairs will organize the volunteer champion network in their region. We believe this will allow us to sort of approach and incorporate both our site-based and our remote employees for engagement and connection opportunities. And I think one thing that's worth mentioning, I know recognition was touched on, and I'll touch on that later, but one piece I wanted to mention, we hosted a bunch of focus groups a few weeks ago. And one piece of consistent feedback that we heard is that employees want this to be part of our official performance review process at Ford. So that's something we're also looking at incorporating, and I believe our employee resource groups have already kind of opened the door for that, but that will be an important piece that we'll incorporate long-term as well.
Go
Just
ahead.
really quick,
Yeah.
I'll plus one to the performance review. We have a robust kind of peer review system every 6 months, and it's been a huge way to incentivize our champions to kind of have our team notify their managers of the hard work that they're doing outside of their day job. So it's been great. And the only other thing I'll mention is that we've received so much positive feedback about our champions collaborating regionally as well as with our ERGs. So I think a couple new things that we've enacted over the last 6 months to a year are our ERGs actually have community outreach leads for each of them. So I work very, very closely with those community outreach leads alongside our champions to help kind of build collaboration and plan events together. And then just a couple weeks ago, we created a new role that we call our regional lead, which are basically experienced champions that have already been doing it for over a year, but kind of incentivizing them and pushing them into somewhat of a leadership role across the region. And we're hopeful, because we've seen last year that this happened, that'll increase collaboration, and some of the one-off events turn into larger regional initiatives that people can bounce ideas off of and work together on.
So Empowership is our focus today, and this group is going to talk to us for a second about how we empower employees to lead. And
The panel approves of making up words.
We've been doing that a lot. Can I go to you for this one first, Will? How do you employ your? And I'm not going to say the word again. If you can just go. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. So a little bit of context about our program. It's about 2 years old. So I joined about 2 years. It was right after we launched our giving and volunteering platform. We partner with Benevity and obviously Gadara as well. And at that point, we realized that our small but mighty team was going to need to rely on our champions to really kind of lead these things in their respective offices. So our setup is that we have 2 champions per office that we have at least 100 volunteer or 100 employees at. And because we were going to rely on those 2 champions to kind of lead this, we wanted to prioritize teaching them and sharing with them what our overall strategy is. Because if we are going to rely on them, we need them to be an extension of our team. And I will probably say an extension of our team 5 more times throughout this presentation, because they honestly are, because we, like I said, we rely on them so heavily. So last year we were super, super fortunate. I would argue there's a little bit of luck involved as well, that we planned an offsite for our champions, and we gathered together in person. And I think every company could do this a little differently. Ours was spread out globally. Our company has a really massive presence in Southeast Asia and in the Middle East. So we were really lucky that I got to travel, and Ellie on my team, shout out to Ellie, got to travel to Dubai for an offsite, which I'm sure all of you are eyes rolling. The TikTok guy wanted to go to Dubai and take content of him riding a camel, and
You said it.
Yeah. There were no camels ridden in Dubai.
Maybe like a ChatGPT image of you riding a camel, maybe.
Yeah, that's an AI image. That's not actually me. Yeah. But what I will say is that there were no camels ridden, and the trip actually ended up pretty differently than what you're all expecting. But so we had 25 champions that were able to make the trip out of like the 40 that we had at the time. So it was a great turnout. We were really happy with that. sharing best practices, talking about our strategy and kind of diving deep into planning out what the rest of the year was going to look like. And if I can share with you kind of what the collaboration was like before that offsite and afterwards, it really was night and day. Our calls that we had on a monthly basis were usually people without videos on, relying on me to be the main voice and kind of guiding the conversation. And afterwards, I could barely get a word into our calls after this meetup. So it was invaluable. I think the trip, we bonded in many different ways. We got through some adversity when we were in Dubai. I don't know if anyone remembers April of last year. They were hit with the worst rain there was more rain in one day than it had happened in 70 years leading up to that. And when we were all trying to travel home to our destinations, everyone's flights got canceled. Everyone was reaching out, we need to stay another night at the hotel. I don't know what to do. And it was a mess, honestly. Like, it sounds like this perfect trip, but it was a series of highs and lows. And yeah, we won't go too deep into the lows, but I'll just tell you that like going through that adversity with these champions built our relationships, and it was something that I think we still talk about now as one of like the greatest moments of being a TikTok employee. And there's a lot, but yeah, the takeaway and why I'm sharing this story is that if you can find a way, and it doesn't need to be a global meetup. I understand that like we decided to prioritize our budget. And honestly, we probably paid Gadara less because we prioritized our budget to make this event happen. But in the end, it led to more events. It led to collaboration. And I think even if you can do it on a regional basis, if you can gather people together in the same few states that they represent in the U.S. or in one region, it was invaluable. So
Yes, to reorganizing your budget if you have to, because consistently we also see that once you've had that summit, and often in person, a great example, they're not here, but Southern Glazers Wine and Spirits, they do theirs so well, so beautifully. People showed up and they were like, oh, this is what the company cares about. I want to be part of this. Like changes everything. Okay, this isn't my panel, sorry.
One last thing. I understand that like the hesitancy because this was a hesitancy that we faced before we made this decision, that champions, there's turnover, people leave the company, people get busy, they want to, relinquish their duties. That did happen. There were people that traveled to Dubai and left a couple months afterwards, but they became champions of the champion program, and they helped us recruit new champions with enthusiasm that they didn't necessarily have before. So yes, that is something to consider, but it wasn't something that affected our program.
It's awesome, thank you. Marissa, do you want to speak to this?
I think when we were trying to empower our champions, again, thinking of the different functions that they may represent, for us it was what could they help us solve for as well. A challenge that we face at ServiceNow with communications and an ever-growing company, again, in 6 years we grew from 9,000 employees to 27,000 employees. I should probably also know what that meant profit-wise, but I don't. Come back to me on that later. But what it means is that trying to communicate with our employees about the work that we're doing and the available programs and the resources is that we can't shout about everything all at once. And I can't just take a full menu and a full catalog and bring that to everyone. So for me, a champion was more about what partnership can you own? What vendor relationship can you own? What KPI can you own for us? What impact do you want to make? Or even thinking about these big, beautiful stories we have, how does it relate to a certain executive's talk track? So it was really having them feel ownership of the total story and the total impact and go deeper with fewer things. It's made it a lot easier when I go into my strategy meetings with them to say, okay, we've learned the data shows us that your org likes doing mentorship type opportunities. We have a fantastic strategic partner that has XYZ this year. You're gonna own that. And it means that then when I'm going into the room with our comm stakeholders, I don't have 50 stories because I've let other people tell that for us. So it's giving them ownership and again, really mapping back to that slide you had before of like, what's the bigger purpose storytelling? And they truly feel ownership of that. And also encouraging them to think about how repeat efforts in that space is the story, right? It's not just about what can I do new and different each time. I mean, how many times have you had someone say, well, we've done that before? Okay, great, but that is still important. Your nonprofit still needs you to do that work. That's why it's still an available volunteer opportunity. So we've really tried to partner with each of our champions, again, whether it's by function or by region, truly making sure that they're localizing our global impact strategy. You know, I can't sit here in California and say what advancing economic workforce in Singapore looks like. We need them to own those narratives. So that's what champions have been for us, is to really help solve for this everything all at once communications challenge, both internally and externally. So we've tried to have them own some of those relationships.
Love it. Thank you so much. Steph, and then Allison. Then Alice, sorry.
Yeah, sure. I kind of want to go back to the recognition piece. So where I'm at is everyone familiar with Rudolph the Red-Nosed Ranger?
No, who is
movie?
this you speak of?
Raise your hand if you, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, anyone see it? Okay, a few of us in the audience.
Wow, that was less than I expected.
Nobody was expecting you to talk about Rudolph. That's why they're stunned for a second.
That's why I'm here. So, you know Yukon Cornelius at the top of a mountain, he's like, Yahoo, right? So, it's very close to Christmas, it's still in my mind. This is a Yahoo moment for me, recognition. And that's what I'm going to compare it to. So, you know, at Ford Volunteer Corps, we're really excited to formally be able to recognize all volunteer champions who have been active in supporting their communities, in many cases for years, for decades. So I'm really excited for this. We're going to be formalizing our network. Some recognition components we're going to be able to offer are the ability to select grants for our Global Caring Month and sort of direct the nonprofits that they'll go to. We're going to be able to provide recognition in other formats as well. So also our virtual collateral, so they'll get like a employee signature. We'll talk about that, the fact that they're a volunteer champion. Physical swag, so we'll get customized t-shirts. Everyone loves free t-shirts. Raise your hand if you love free t-shirts. I know you all do. At least our champions definitely do. And we'll provide the ability for them to sort of learn and connect through quarterly lunch and learns with other folks that are also champions. And so we'll be able to sort of strengthen their social impact knowledge. And I want to kind of go back to the two different roles we have. So the volunteer ambassadors, really the idea is for them to sort of organize their volunteer events, at least one volunteer event per quarter, engaging at least 10 employees. We expect them to also sort of promote that event at their site. We are looking forward to stories and photos that we can share on our social media channels, and then we also expect them to do the due diligence and report their volunteer hours and track participation. Our chair role, on the other hand, really excited for this one. We're going to have a chair for each region or a co-chair for each region, and they will basically organize the volunteer champion network in their region. So they'll be hosting sort of monthly check-ins with their volunteer champions. They'll also be able to participate in our U.S. Ford Volunteer Corps Council meetings. Those will include also our skill team leads, our department leads, as well as our employee resource group community chairs. They'll have a budget, which I think is pretty important, that they'll be able to utilize Catalyst grants towards local nonprofits, so kind of making that decision. They know best, they're in the region. And then also sort of tracking participation and ensuring this sort of consistent, uniform communication around the region. So I think that structure is going to be really important for us, just given how unstructured we've been to date. And I loved Will's Champion Network Summit, so we're definitely going to be hosting one of those this year. I'm very excited about that. Not in Dubai. But that's all right, maybe some point in the future. And so those are kind of the roles we have, but I just wanted to really stress the importance of recognition and recognizing your champions, really keeping them motivated long term.
So I'm going to try to keep this short, but that's not who I am. For us at NASDAQ, our purpose program is a program for employees, led by employees. And so my responsibility is to have the pleasure of helping them operationalize, perhaps administrate, and then I am a champion of our champions. And that is really, when you think about it, they sit in the driver's seat and I sit passenger, and I let them tell me what they need me to do so they can do what they want to do on behalf of employees.
Oh my gosh, that was so quick.
Succinct.
Yeah, and really beautifully said. Thank you.
I wrote it down.
I love it. That's great. We're gonna start to move toward when we're gonna kind of open it up for some discussion. And I do mean discussion, actually, because one of the great things about the growth of our space is that we actually have a lot of experts in the room now, a lot of people with really interesting experience, and we can teach each other. So start to think about what you'd like to add or ask this group. And as we do that, we're gonna invite this group actually to just land on a piece of advice. Like, if somebody here, even if they're super confident in their champion network, if you were gonna say, just like one thing, here's one thing that could strengthen your people, what you're doing, empowering them, some aspect of it, can we try that advice? I'd love to just see who's gonna just start talking first this time. How's it gonna go?
Fine.
Well done,
Quick
Marissa.
debate. What we've all talked about is how our champions, we're the small but mighty team that are doing the work and driving the strategy, but for everyone else, it is additive to their roles. It's secondary to their jobs. We want to keep them praised and inspired, and we know that that's innate for most of them. So for me, it's all about how can I reduce friction? How can I make it low lift, plug and play, take the common feedback that we're getting and create templates, create the resources, again, making sure that every platform that we work with, every vendor that we work with, every relationship really feels like anyone can lean in and adopt that. So that's how we've tried to empower and reduce friction. So I would just say try to make it as easy as possible for them.
I can go next. So I'm going to disobey your question and Stephanie provide sort of 4 pieces of advice. I'm going to go ahead and roll into one. No control of this panel. So I'm going to say formalize, localize, recognize, and I'm going to make up a word here because we like to make up words on this panel, so I'm going to say budgetize. So formalize, kind of what I mentioned, being able to sort of provide structure and process for your volunteer champions, provide sort of clear roles, responsibilities, and expectations. Localize, and this is something I picked up through my career, even prior to Ford, my over 10 years of experience in social impact. Localization is really important. There's going to be regional and cultural differences everywhere. So maybe consider, especially if you're looking to go global, not adopting a very strict one-size-fits-all approach, because that might not work in every single market. Recognition piece we mentioned, sort of very strong, robust, formalized, or not necessarily formalized, but just recognition opportunities for your champions to keep them motivated long term. And then budgetize, the word I made up, being able to provide a budget, allocating a budget for those local champions. They know their areas best, right? So empower them to sort of proliferate and provide your company's social impact vision and message in their communities.
That worked, that was good, thanks, Steph. Will?
Yeah, I think one piece of advice is to share the why. And I think it's easy for us to have these champions in place and to kind of think of them as event executors and really ambassadors of what we're doing. But from what our program, the experience that we've had is these are curious, passionate individuals, and they don't have to be doing this. This is secondary to their role. So they want to know why we want to partner with that organization. They want to know what our overall strategy is. And if we're going to trust them, as I said, to be an extension of our team, we need to share our strategy with them and make sure that they understand that. So sharing what our OKRs are so that they know what to strive for and what each event should look like and what our expectations are. And it just helps so much in them getting bought in. And hopefully, we have a 1 to 2 year term. We're kind of lenient. We're not very strict on how long our champions stay in the program. But if we want them to stay for at least a year, we've just seen that they need to be bought in. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, is for them to feel like they're a part of what we're doing and that we're not just telling them to go execute, that they're a part of that conversation.
It's beautiful, thank you. Let's go to additions. How do we say it at Realized Worth? We say, add, ask, offer. What do you have to add? What do you have to ask? What do you have to offer? Cisco, right? Yeah. Nice.
Ask for regional leads. How much of this becomes part of their day-to-day? Do you define, spend X percent of your time on this volunteer role? A little more on how you might tie into a collaborative experience. And this is for anybody on the panel.
I mentioned it, so I can speak to it, but does anyone want to chime in first? Yeah, so thanks, Bridget. And we just enacted this role, so we have ambitions and expectations for how it's going to go, but we'll find out. Talk to me again in 6 months. In terms of how we are setting expectations and sharing with them what the time requirements are and everything else, we are not expecting them to act as the current CSR champion in their given office anymore. We are stepping them up to think about it only from a regional perspective, and obviously their local office factors into that. But by them being pushed into this almost leadership role, we still are recruiting new champions to kind of take their place on a local scale. So they won't be in the nitty-gritty as much on a local scale, so they'll be thinking more regionally. That's the ideal situation that we're talking about. So like many of my peers on stage, we managers are involved in them becoming CSR champions, and they need to approve a certain time requirement. We usually tell our champions 8 to 10 hours a month. I don't know if that's on par with everyone here, but that's usually what we tell them. Some people feel like that's fair, some people feel like that's too much, and we definitely lose people in the process of explaining that. But the regional lead is something that we hope can take a little bit of time for our team to step back a little bit and keep kind of eyes on the strategy and train those regional leads to be, to share that strategy as well. So we'll see, but that's the ideal scenario in our minds.
Thanks. Well, sorry, Esther, I just want to call out Esther from Apple too, because I know that this panel didn't lend itself to adding sort of retail to that perspective of time. They have a great approach at Apple with the way that they use store leaders, market leaders, and really coordinate everybody to be able to be realistic about the time factor and like what their level of responsibility is and so on. So thank you for that question.
The employees that are maybe passionate but not quite a fit, but you still want to get that energy. So the applicant for the champion that either you already have to or that type of thing, or maybe you have an employee that is so tied to the food bank, for example, in their area. How do you make sure they're feeling included even if they're not quite a fit in that area?
I can take that. I know that I said I wasn't talking about my councils today, but I will for this question. The councils have evolved so that there's committees and subcommittees for everything. So our councils will have either a lead or a co-lead. And this year we expanded to also include a treasury chair, a communications chair, and a marketing chair. And then within that, if the council is big enough, again, it's not one size fits all, but I'll just speak to our Santa Clara council, then the treasury chair can delegate to other members who didn't necessarily have the strategy, or maybe they were going to own a nonprofit relationship. Great. We also give them a portion of our investment portfolio to say, who are the 2 to 3 nonprofits you want to work with, and you should own that relationship. And that might also mean, now if a team wants to volunteer at Second Harvest, great, that's the person to go to. And it's kind of taking it off of me, it's taking it off the lead, it's taking it off of the chairs, and someone can own that relationship. And we've also just found that there are some people who they just want to show up and volunteer at the events too. And that's great because maybe the other people that are doing more of the relationship management don't have time to show up to all the actual events. So we've just tried to make it seem that there is a role for everyone. And the more we've actually defined it has made it feel less burdensome too. Because our treasury chairs, they're most needed in the beginning of the year to execute the grants. If they have a really busy, maybe they're on a sales team and they're not going to be able to help us end a quarters, great, then you help us out in the beginning of the year and you're good. So we've just really tried to define different roles so that everybody feels like they have an opportunity.
Thank you, Marissa. And that reminds me, yesterday you heard references to tourist, traveler, and guide. That model, first, second, third stage volunteers, about 70% of your people getting involved in the program for the first time are going to be tourists. They just need a chance to fall in love, and they often show up with the organization that they love, and you're like, yeah, but we're going to take them on a journey. We're going to open up the end of that funnel, allow them to come into something that lets them see the program and fall in love with it. The second stage, travelers, they should be looking after those people. They should be helping give them a great experience. And I'm never talking about a great experience at the expense of the community, let's be clear. Whew. Travelers should be looking after those people, and they're the ones that are moving forward on their journey and beginning to take more responsibility, beginning to emotionally connect with the cause, and they may or may not move on that journey. It's okay, we're just gonna meet them where they are. Guides, they're few and far between, but you know who they are right now. You could name them, and they're the ones that are gonna live and die for the program, and they'll align with whatever cause you need, but not if they weren't empowered to go along that journey. Let's do like one more question, comment, yeah.
So I have a question. I feel like a lot of times when we talk about ambassador programs, we talk about different roles, responsibilities. But I'm curious, I think this work should really be centering joy and fun. So I'm curious, what are different ways that you center joy and fun in programs?
Centering joy and fun, I love it. Who's gonna speak to that?
Well, I didn't do it on purpose, but again, the councils kind of form their own culture too, as they should. And it's funny, our local council here in Santa Clara, they've called themselves the Posse, and so they've even just like renamed their Teams chat for that. And let them, like, great, that works for you. It's not going to make sense somewhere else. And they also, at the end of the year, came up with superlatives, right? So they would recognize they made their own awards at the end of the year too. So it wasn't something that cost any budget. It was printed laminated paper maybe. I think she made a paper rose for them. So it's just also leaning into what's their quirk and what's going to make them have fun with it. And it's really allowed them to have their own natural bonds. I don't think I can force joy or enforce that. It's got to come naturally. So, but when they've done that, I'm like, great, anybody else like that idea? Like, you can adopt it.
I think there's other things you can think about too. So when I worked at Dropbox, we had this term surprise and delight. And I think carrying that into this space, I know it's really hard because we are, and I've mentioned these formalized networks, right? But if there's other opportunities to recognize folks or provide fun in some capacity, like for example, at Ford Philanthropy, sometimes we get tickets to events from our partners. So that's maybe something you could provide to your champion networks as a benefit, and they can go have fun with other champions and connect at that event. So I think there's just other ways, like think of ways that you could infuse surprise and delight into your programs.
I think the other thing that we've brought it up a little bit, but we're humans working with humans, right? So this isn't gonna happen overnight. This is gonna take time. So if you don't have the time, it's probably not the right time to launch a champion network because it's not an easy road. But prioritizing relationships over transactions when you're working with these individuals helps you get to know them on a much deeper level, and so it helps you bring things to them that make sense for them. So, like, I know Toronto Volunteer Committee, Omar and Sagar, they lead our committee, and nothing brings them more joy than climbing the CN Tower in Toronto. Doesn't do anything for me, but they love it. Great. Let's figure out how to incentivize. Do you want to do a double match for every dollar that you fundraise as a team? That's really easy for me to do for them, and it completely transforms how they operationalize that activity for the office. And so, again, I think it's taking the time to prioritize those relationships over those transactions, and NASDAQ, we know about transactions, to really make sure that you're spending the time and giving them exactly what they need from you and the relationship that you're building with them.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so like 15 years ago, this industry was really focused for the very first time on program strategy. We've come really far. A few years after that, we were super focused on measurement. We're still trying. We are now, as an industry, intensely focused on these champion networks. They're gonna solve those other two. Measurement and strategy, they're gonna make it real. So let's focus on this together. Today, I would love to invite you to open up this conversation together because again, there are so many experts in this room. I'm looking at faces and I'm like, oh, you have something to say? Tell us about your network. And it's legitimately true. So let's keep talking about this. Let's keep working together to make this space better. Thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate you.